going back to the theme you discussed of the current state of the New York City startup system and ecosystem, can you talk about the patterns and the techniques you've seen successfully used by New York startups in terms of building a great team of engineers and other really talented people here and how they've been able to do it?
It's easier if you've done it before, and so there are, probably 30 to 50 startups here in New York that the founding team has started one or more companies together. And for those people, it's usually about putting the band back together, getting the key players from the earlier startup together, and then recruiting around that key team. And a really good example of that is are Kevin Ryan and Dwight Merriman, who were the CEO and the CTO of DoubleClick. And they actually built an incubator, and they launched Guilt Group, and they launched 10Gen, which is a company we're investors in, and they launched Business Insider and Music Nation, and I think Panther. So they launched a bunch of companies, and they used their network from DoubleClick and their reputation to help get these companies started. So for a lot of people, that's the path. For the first-time entrepreneur, it's much harder, and usually they'll find a couple of developers, and they'll build something and get a little funding, and then go from there. And that's where I think we can really help these companies. Our firm, Union Square Ventures, and other VC firms as well, get involved in these young companies, and we can help them recruit. And we often spend 20, 30, 40% of our time helping our companies recruit. And generally what we're doing is we're recruiting from people that we know from, I've, since 1990, which is now 20 years, I've probably made 2 investments a year here in New York. So that's 40 companies I've been involved in. And so that's a pretty big Rolodex of people that have worked in companies that I've been an investor in. And so we can tap into that Rolodex and identify talent to those companies, and they can hire them. There's also a pretty good set of networking events that people can go to. I think most people are familiar with the New York Tech Meetup, but there's also a whole bunch of other much smaller meetups that are more category specific. We're an investor in meetup.com, and I always tell people, like, if you want to find software engineers, it's pretty easy to find meetups that software engineers go to. So you could look for Ruby meetups, or you could look at PHP meetups, or you could look at MySQL meetups, or any other kind of technology. And there's probably anywhere from 10 to 20 of them going on in the New York metro area. And you can go there and you can meet developers and recruit at events like that. So I think that the talent is out there, and it's just a matter of going out and finding it, and it's very time consuming to recruit. I also think it's very important, particularly in a young company, say anything less than 50, that you hire for culture as much as skill set, and being able to get along and function as a team is really, really critical. And I've seen companies hire people who are really, really capable, skilled, experienced people, but they just didn't fit, and that never really works, particularly in a young company. So it's important to understand what your company culture is and the value system that you've got, and hire people that can function well in that.
In the last 20 years, have you ever been tempted to leave venture and start working for one of the portfolio companies, or
an entrepreneur that you've met, and if so, who, and if not, why not?
I've never been tempted, but I know that that temptation exists among many people in the venture business. And I think it just depends on how you're wired up. So I really enjoy working on lots of projects at the same time and being able to go an inch deep and a mile wide across a portfolio. I've always liked that. And you know, I just don't know if I could be happy working on one project, one company, exclusively, you know, for an extended period of time. So it's never happened, and that has never happened to me. And I love the fact that every day, you know, I get to look at new projects and meet new people and think about working with new people, and it fits my personality type.
I guess this is actually sort of off Mike's question. I heard you speak back in, I want to say November or December, at the journalism school at Columbia, and one of the things that you said was, you know, start companies in your 30s and then do VC in your 40s.
Right.
So how does that jive with the idea that, you know, you do want to be sort of spread a little wider across a lot of companies and work not so deep with each one, I suppose, if your style is more of that as opposed to being an entrepreneur?
Yeah, so I think one is a question of personality and fit, and the other is a question of what's optimal in terms of a career path. And the people who have come into the venture capital business in the past 5 or 10 years that have been the most successful right out of the bat are people who spent, you know, 10 to 15 years of their career working in companies, and I think that it's harder to be a great venture capitalist if you never did that stint in the startup world, and I think there's a whole bunch of reasons for it, but some of it is to be able to understand what's really going on inside a company. If you've never really been inside a company like that, it's really hard to see it, but if you've been inside a company like that, you can almost smell it when the marketing and sales people are fighting with the engineering people, because you've been in that situation and you can read the tea leaves. And I also think the Rolodex is so important. So, you know, I was saying that, you know, I've invested in call it 40 companies in New York in the past 20 years, and I know lots of teams, but I've never been inside those teams. And I always tell people when they start companies, put your team together with people that you've worked with in the past. So, you know, if you go out into the startup world, I said this to a guy I met last night at a meetup, and he said, you know, I want to start a company in the next 5 years. And I said, well, the thing that you need to do is you need to be putting together a list of the best software engineers that you've worked with in all the companies you work with, and you need to tell them that at some point I'm going to start a company, I'm going to try to convince you to come work for it. And having worked with software engineers at that level is different than what I've done. So I think it's really, you get that. And then the other thing is a business Rolodex. A really good job to have out of business school, if you want to go work in a young company, is a business development job, because it's an externally facing job, it's a deal doing job, you meet lots of people, you do a lot of pitches, you hear a lot of pitches, and you build a big Rolodex pretty quickly. And I think that is a great pathway into the venture business after you've been through a couple of roller coaster rides. And that to me is the perfect career path. It doesn't mean that you can't go into venture capital right out of business school. I did it. But I think that for 10 years I wasn't very good. And it took me longer to be a good investor and be helpful to the companies that I worked with than if I had just spent 10 years working in startups.